I stood at the edge of the grand dining room in Zintera Manor, my heart pounding like the waves crashing against the Baltic shore outside Vintscale. The air was heavy with the scent of polished oak and amber chandelier light, casting a warm yet suffocating glow across the long table. My family sat there, their faces familiar yet distant, as if I were a stranger intruding on their sacred ritual. I was Liga Vitola, the unseen backbone of Zeltara Solutions, our family's logistics empire. But tonight, I refused to be invisible. I clutched a neatly bound proposal in my hands, its pages trembling slightly, and took a breath to steady the fury rising in my chest. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from those you trusted most, right in front of your eyes, as if you didn't exist? That's where my story begins. Before starting this story, if you are listening from USA, please leave a comment with number 9. And if you are from another country, please leave the name of your lovely country. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to listen to more stories. It was a crisp autumn evening in 2023, the kind where the sea breeze slipped through the manor's ancient windows, whispering secrets no one dared to voice. My sister, Mara Zvirbali, sat at the head of the table, her posture regal, her smile as polished as the silverware. She was the face of Zeltara, the one who gave interviews in sleek blazers while I toiled in the shadows, mapping vendor networks and debugging automation code. My parents, Carlos and Dana, flanked her, their expressions unreadable. My brother, Edgar's, sipped his wine, avoiding my gaze. We were here for what Mara called a strategic family council, a phrase that once filled me with pride but now felt like a hollow promise. For years, I'd sat at the table's edge, nodding politely, my contributions buried under their praise for Mara's vision. But tonight, I was done being their silent cog. I cleared my throat, the sound sharp against the room's oppressive quiet. "I've prepared a proposal," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. "I'm requesting 15% equity in Zeltara Solutions, in recognition of my work on supply chain optimization, vendor integration, and the automation systems that saved our Baltic contracts." I slid the proposal across the table, its pages whispering against the wood. My words hung in the air, bold and unyielding, a challenge to the years of being overlooked. For a moment, there was only the faint hum of the chandelier above, its amber light flickering like my fading hope. Then Mara laughed, not a soft chuckle, but a sharp, mocking sound that sliced through the room like a blade. 15%, she repeated, her lips curling into a grin that made my blood boil. "Liga, you're the glue, not the architect. You keep things running, but you don't build the foundation." Her words were a slap, delivered with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this dismissal in her mind. I waited, my eyes darting to my parents, to Edgar's, praying for a flicker of dissent, a shift in their seats. Anything. But my father poured more tea, the clink of his spoon deafening in the silence. My mother adjusted her bracelet, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. Edgar's swirled his wine, his face a mask of indifference. That laugh echoed in my skull, louder than the sea outside, reverberating through every memory I'd buried. The nights I spent hunched over spreadsheets, perfecting pricing models while Mara toasted clients in Riga. The weekends I sacrificed, untangling software glitches while my family planned their next retreat. The holidays I missed, ensuring vendor rollouts went smoothly, only to hear Mara claim the credit in her press releases. I felt my chest tighten, not with sadness but with a searing rage that threatened to spill over. They hadn't just ignored me, they'd erased me, and that laugh was their confession. I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the hardwood deliberate, a sound that cut through their silence like a scream. My hands shook, not from fear but from the fury coursing through me. "Thank you," I said, my voice low and cold, for making everything crystal clear. Mara blinked, her grin faltering for a split second. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came. My father cleared his throat, a meaningless gesture. I turned and walked out, my steps echoing in the cavernous hall, each one a vow to never let them diminish me again. Outside, the Baltic wind stung my face, but it couldn't cool the fire in my veins. I climbed into my car, the leather seats cold against my skin, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The manor loomed behind me, its amber-lit windows mocking my departure. I'd given Zeltara everything my time, my mind, my heart, and they'd laughed. But that laugh wasn't the end. It was the spark that would ignite something they couldn't control. As I drove into the night, the sea roaring beside me, I knew one thing: they'd shown their hand, and now it was my turn to play. The night I left Gentara Manor, the sting of Mara's laugh clung to me like salt on skin. But it wasn't until weeks later, in the dim glow of Zeltara's office, that I saw the full extent of their betrayal. I sat alone at my desk, the only light coming from my laptop screen, casting a cold blue haze across the room. Outside, the Baltic wind howled, rattling the windows of our vent-scale headquarters. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tracing lines of code I'd written to streamline our logistics network. For years, I'd poured my soul into Zeltara Solutions, believing my work mattered, even if my family didn't see me. But now, with every keystroke, a quiet fury simmered, urging me to uncover the truth they'd buried. Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were stealing your worth right under your nose? That's when I began to fight back. It was late November, 2023, nearly a month since that humiliating meeting. I'd kept my head down, showing up to work with a forced smile, avoiding Mara's smug glances in the hallways. But the memories gnawed at me: nights spent perfecting vendor integrations, weekends lost to debugging software, all while Mara took the spotlight. I'd always been the one they called when a contract teetered or a system crashed, yet I was never invited to strategy meetings or client dinners. They'd labeled me the team's spirit, a cruel euphemism for someone they used but never valued. The anger I'd felt at the manor had hardened into resolve, a blade I sharpened in silence. That night, as I sifted through old project files, a soft knock broke my focus. Dace Lipina, our lead accountant, stood in the doorway, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. Dace was a quiet woman, meticulous and loyal, but her eyes held a flicker of unease. "Liga," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "You need to see this." She handed me a folded sheet, its edges creased as if she'd hesitated before bringing it. I unfolded it slowly, my pulse quickening. It was an internal payout ledger for the Baltic Stream project, a multi-million-dollar contract I'd saved by redesigning our automation system. My name was nowhere on it, not under project lead, not even as support. Instead, Mara's name was listed, alongside junior staff I'd trained, all credited with bonuses, my work, my sleepless nights, erased. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling with a rage that felt like fire in my bones. "They removed you after the first phase," Dace said, her voice barely above a whisper. No memo, no explanation. Mara signed off on it. I met her gaze, searching for some mistake, but her expression confirmed the truth. My family hadn't just overlooked me, they'd deliberately stripped me of my due. The betrayal cut deeper than Mara's laugh, a wound that bled anger and indignation. I thanked Dace, my voice steady despite the storm inside, and she slipped out, leaving me alone with the ledger's damning proof. I drove to Krastabine, a small cafe nestled along Vintscale's waterfront, where the scent of roasted coffee mingled with the briny air of the Baltic Sea. It was past midnight, the cafe nearly empty save for a lone barista wiping down counters. I chose a table by the window, the glass fogged from the cold outside, and opened my laptop. The waves crashed rhythmically beyond, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I couldn't let this go, not anymore. That night, I began Project Salina, a secret archive to protect my work. I named it after the Latvian word for sun, a promise to bring light to what they'd hidden in shadow. I started with the Baltic Stream files, copying every diagram, every line of code, every email I'd sent on my personal laptop during late nights and weekends. I time-stamped each document, noting dates and devices to prove they were mine, not Zeltara's. My fingers flew across the keys, driven by a fury that felt righteous. I wasn't just saving my work, I was building a fortress against their lies. I archived vendor maps I'd drawn in 2021, automation scripts from 2022, and dashboards I'd prototyped during unpaid overtime. Each file was a brick in the wall I was erecting, a testament to the worth they'd tried to erase. As the hours passed, the cafe's warmth couldn't thaw the cold anger in my chest. I thought of my mother's silence at the manor, my father's indifference, Edgar's averted eyes. They'd all known. They'd watched Mara claim my work, my ideas, and done nothing. The realization fueled me, turning my pain into purpose. I wasn't documenting for revenge, not yet. I was doing it to survive, to ensure they couldn't bury me again. By dawn, I'd archived over 20 documents, each one a silent scream against their betrayal. Back at my apartment, I stored the files on an encrypted drive, tucking it into a drawer beside old letters from my grandmother. Her words echoed in my mind. Write your own story. Liga, don't wait for their permission. I hadn't listened then, but now her voice was a lifeline. I sat on my couch, the first light of morning creeping through the blinds, and made a vow. I wouldn't beg for their acknowledgement. I'd make my worth undeniable. The ledger from Dace was just the beginning. There were more truths to uncover, more lies they'd woven into Zeltara's history, and I'd find them all, piece by searing piece. The conference hall in Daugara buzzed with the hum of ambition, its glass walls reflecting the sharp lights of a late spring evening in 2024. I stood at the back, my arms crossed, watching Mara Zvirbule command the stage with her practiced charm. She unveiled a logistics model I knew too well, every curve of its data pipeline. Every node of its vendor network was mine, forged in sleepless nights on my personal laptop. Yet, as the audience applauded, my name was absent from her slides, erased as if I'd never existed. The rage that had simmered since I uncovered their betrayal now roared in my chest. A fire no amount of Baltic breeze could douse. Have you ever stood in a room full of people, watching someone steal your life's work while the world cheered? That's when I knew I had to break their silence or let it bury me forever. It was May, 6 months after I'd begun Project Salina, my secret archive of every contribution Zeltara had tried to erase. I'd come to the Daugara Tech Summit to observe, not to confront, but Mara's audacity changed that. As she clicked through her presentation, touting our team's innovation, I felt my hands clench, nails digging into my palms. The model she showcased was the Baltic Stream framework I'd built, refined over years of unpaid overtime. I'd saved that project from collapse. Yet here she stood, basking in stolen glory. When the session ended, I approached her, my voice low but sharp. That was my work. Mara, you know it. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. Liga, don't be dramatic. It's a team effort. The dismissal was a knife, twisting deeper than her laugh at Zentara Manor, and it fueled a fury that burned through my restraint. Days later, back at Zeltara's vent-scale office, Mara's assistant slid a folder across my desk. Legal needs your signature, she said, avoiding my gaze. I opened it to find a contract, its language cold and predatory, demanding I relinquish all rights to internal systems and frameworks developed under Zeltara's operations. My name was pre-filled on the signature line, a calculated trap to erase my intellectual property forever. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a righteous indignation that made my vision blur. They weren't just denying my contributions, they were trying to steal my future. I tore the contract in half, the rip echoing in the quiet office, and walked out. That night, in my apartment, I made the decision that would change everything I was done with Zeltara. I would build my own empire. I founded Salina Systems the next week, registering it in a small vent-scale office with a single desk and a window overlooking the Baltic pines. The name, inspired by the sun, was a vow to shine where they'd cast me in shadow, I poured my savings into the venture, using Project Salina's files to build a logistics platform that surpassed anything Zeltara could dream of. But my family didn't let go quietly. In July 2024, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my doorstep. It was a lawsuit from Zeltara, accusing me of stealing proprietary materials. The audacity of their claims suing me for my own work ignited a fury so fierce I could barely breathe. They thought they could intimidate me, silence me with legal threats, but they'd underestimated the woman they'd dismissed. I turned to Janice Ozels, a former Zeltara analyst who'd always seen through Mara's facade. Janice, with his quiet intensity, pored over my Project Salina files, cross-referencing timestamps and email trails. "They don't have a case," he said, his voice steady in his cluttered vent-scale office. "Your work predates their claims, all on personal devices. We built a defense, every document a shield against their lies." In September, the court dismissed Zeltara's lawsuit, citing lack of evidence and praising my meticulous records. The judge's words, "Ms. Vitola's rights are protected," were a fleeting triumph, but the victory was hollow. My family's betrayal had cut too deep, and their next move proved they'd stop at nothing. In October, I opened my laptop in my dim apartment, the Baltic wind rattling the windows, and found an article in Baltic Business magazine. The headline screamed, "Family firm faces turmoil over greedy sibling." Mara's face stared back, poised and sympathetic, while the article painted me as an opportunist, a disgruntled sister grasping for unearned credit. The words seared my eyes, each sentence a fresh wound. But worse was yet to come. A podcast notification popped up, featuring Ina Kalnina, a colleague I'd once trusted. Her voice, calm and rehearsed, sliced through my headphones. Liga was talented, but her ambition blinded her. She wanted glory without the grind. The betrayal was suffocating, a vice around my heart. Ina had sat beside me in meetings, used my templates, and now she was rewriting my story to save Mara's reputation. I sank onto my couch, the room spinning with rage and despair. My family hadn't just stolen my work, they'd weaponized my name, turning me into a villain in a narrative they controlled. The anger that had driven me to build Salina now mixed with a raw, aching betrayal, not just from Mara, but from Ina, from everyone who'd watched me bleed and stayed silent. I wanted to scream, to tear their lies apart, but Janice's words echoed, "Stay quiet. Let the truth fight for you." I closed my laptop, my hands shaking, and stared into the darkness. They thought they'd broken me, but they'd only forged something stronger. Salina Systems was my answer, and I'd make it a force they couldn't ignore. The sea air drifted through the open windows of Salina Systems' new office, carrying the scent of pine and salt from Ventscale's Baltic coast. It was early spring, 2025, and I stood by a whiteboard, watching my team sketch out a logistics dashboard that would redefine efficiency. The laughter of my analysts, free and unguarded, filled the room, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence I'd endured at Zeltara. I'd built this space from nothing, pouring every ounce of my resolve into a company that bore my vision. Yet, even as Salina thrived, the wounds of my family's betrayal lingered, a quiet ache beneath my pride. Have you ever tasted success but still felt the shadow of those who tried to erase you? That's where I stood, balancing triumph and pain, until the world began to see me. In March, we signed a landmark contract with Vitra Logistics, a national giant that had once been Zeltara's client. The deal, sealed in a sleek Riga boardroom, was a testament to Salina's innovation. I shook hands with Vitra's CEO, a woman whose firm grip matched her words. "We knew your work from Baltic Stream. We were waiting for you to step out on your own." Her acknowledgement lit a spark in me, not of vengeance but of validation, a warmth that softened the edges of my anger. Back in Ventscale, our office buzzed with energy, its glass walls reflecting the golden light of spring. My team coders, analysts, dreamers worked not for credit but for creation. and I vowed they'd never feel invisible as I had. In April, I attended a logistics summit in Jermila, a coastal town where the Baltic Sea shimmered under a cloudless sky. I wasn't a speaker, just a guest, but as I sat in the auditorium, the host paused mid-session. "We must recognize Liga Vitola," he announced, "the architect of the vendor optimization model reshaping our industry." The room turned, eyes finding me in the fourth row. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then steady, a sound that drowned out the echo of Mara's laugh. I stood, my heart pounding, not with rage, but with a quiet pride that felt like home. Mara was there, on stage, her clicker frozen, her face a mask of shock. She clicked to the next slide without a word, but I didn't need her to speak. The truth had spoken for me. That night, back in my vent-scale apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. The handwriting was my father's, Carlos Vitol's, precise and familiar, though he'd passed months before. I sat at my kitchen table, the Baltic wind whispering through the open window, and unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "Liga," it began. "You gave more than any of us deserved, and I stayed silent too long. Your work was the heart of Zeltara, and I should have said it." The words blurred as tears welled, not of anger, but of a grief I hadn't named. Tucked inside was a check, modest but made out to Salina Systems, with a memo for what you built. My father's belated recognition was a balm, soothing the raw edges of my family's betrayal. Yet it stirred a pang of loss for the bond we'd never mended. Days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Mara. "We need to talk." It read, her tone clipped, as if she could summon me back to her table. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with a flicker of the old rage. She'd seen Salina's rise, felt the tremors of her own empire cracking, and now she wanted reconciliation on her terms. I deleted the message, my fingers steady, my resolve ironclad. I didn't need her table, I'd built my own. Mara's attempt to reach me was too late, a hollow gesture from someone who'd laughed when I asked for my due. In May, a journalist from Nordic Tech Review interviewed me in our office, sunlight streaming through the windows as my team's keyboards clattered in the background. The article, published a week later, told my story, not the lawsuit, not Mara, but the work, the vision, the woman who refused to stay silent. It spread across social media, resonating with women who'd been overlooked, their comments flooding my inbox. "You gave me courage to speak up." But the real shock came days later, when a former Zeltara employee leaked an internal recording. Mara's voice, clear and cold, rang out Liga's good at tech, but she's better when she doesn't know her power. The clip went viral on LinkedIn, a damning confession that shattered Mara's facade. No one defended her. The silence she'd once wielded against me now turned on her. I stood in my office, watching the city's lights flicker beyond the pines, and felt a weight lift. Salina was no longer a dream, but a reality, its roots deep, its future bright. My father's letter, framed on my desk, reminded me I'd been seen, if only too late. Mara's downfall wasn't my goal, but it was justice, a truth I hadn't forced but allowed to unfold. I'd built something they couldn't erase, and in doing so, I'd found not just success but myself. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of Salina Systems' office, gazing out at Vintscale's Baltic Sea, its waves glinting under the golden hues of a late summer sunset in 2025. The city's lights began to flicker, a tapestry of life unfolding beyond the pine-fringed horizon. Inside, my team's laughter echoed from a meeting room, a sound of creation and camaraderie that filled the space I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. My journey had been one of breaking silence, not just for myself, but for anyone who'd ever been told their worth was less than their work. Have you ever realized that by standing up for yourself, you could light a path for others? That's the truth I carry now, a truth forged in pain but radiant with purpose. It was August, months after the world saw Mara's true colors through that leaked recording, months since my father's letter reminded me I'd been seen. even if too late. Salina Systems wasn't just a company, it was a testament to what happens when you refuse to stay invisible. My team, a group of brilliant minds who'd once been sidelined like me, worked not for applause, but for impact. We built systems that empowered, dashboards that illuminated, and a culture where no one had to beg for a seat. Yet, as I stood there, a quiet resolve settled in my heart. My story wasn't just about triumph over Mara or Zeltara. It was about rewriting the rules for those who came after me. I turned from the window, my reflection steady in the glass, and thought of the women who'd reached out after the Nordic Tech Review article. Their messages, raw and honest, filled a folder on my desk. Your story gave me the courage to leave a job that diminished me. I spoke up at my firm because of you. Each word was a thread, weaving a tapestry of change that stretched beyond vent scale. I realized then that breaking my silence had shattered not just my own chains, but the unspoken rules that keep so many women quiet. It wasn't enough to build Salina, I had to share the lesson that had cost me so much. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to fight to be right, but you must choose yourself, even when the world tells you to shrink. That evening, my phone buzzed with another message from Mara. Liga, please, let's meet. We're still family. The words stung, not with anger, but with a faint echo of the girl I'd once been, hoping for her approval. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who'd built her own table. I read the message again, my fingers hovering over the screen, and felt no urge to reply. Mara's plea was a shadow, too late to touch the light I'd created. I deleted it, the act final, not out of spite but clarity. My future wasn't hers to shape. I'd chosen myself, and that choice was my freedom. As I walked back to my desk, the office quiet now except for the hum of a distant printer, I thought of my grandmother's words, etched in my memory. Write your own story. Liga. I'd done that, not with vengeance, but with vision. Salina Systems was my chapter, but its pages were for others too, for every woman who'd been told her place was in the background, for every voice silenced by those who feared its power. I opened my laptop and began drafting a speech for our next summit. Not about Zeltara's fall, but about the strength found in standing tall. If you've ever been overlooked, I wrote, know this your worth isn't their permission. Build your table, and the world will come to it. I closed my laptop, the sunset now a deep amber, and felt a peace I hadn't known before. My journey had begun with a laugh that cut like a blade, but it ended with a truth that healed. I wasn't just Liga Vitola, the woman who'd built a company worth millions. I was a beacon for those still finding their voice, a reminder that silence is a choice, and so is courage. Liga Vitola's journey teaches us a profound lesson. True empowerment comes from choosing yourself, even when those closest to you seek to diminish your worth. In a society where women often face undervaluation in workplaces and families, Liga's story resonates as a beacon of resilience. It reminds us that breaking silence is not just personal liberation, but a ripple effect, inspiring others to claim their value. Her triumph over betrayal shows that courage and perseverance can transform pain into purpose, a message that uplifts us all to build our own tables. This story is a work of fiction created for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to attack or defame any individual, family, or organization. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. If this story moved you or sparked a thought, please let us know by commenting below. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us create more stories that inspire and entertain. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.